Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to call off the quorum call.
Without objection, the quorum call will be suspended.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise in strong support of the flood insurance fix bill on the floor today, and I urge my colleagues on a bipartisan basis to come together and to pass this first crucial step toward getting it right with the National Flood Insurance Program. It's important for America. It's important for millions upon millions of Americans, homeowners, not just in Louisiana, not just in Florida, but in every state. Every state of the country is absolutely affected. And I also specifically urge my colleagues to defeat the Toomey Amendment, which I think is very well intended but will not get the job done, and to waive the budget point of order, which is a largely technical point of order. And I'll explain each of those in turn. First of all, Mr. President, the need for this bill to get things right. All of us came together over a year ago and passed the so-called Biggert-Waters Act to reauthorize the National Flood Insurance Program and to reform it in important ways. And we needed to do that broad brush. The program needed to be continued, not just in short-term fits and starts, which had been the pattern for many years. In fact, in 2010, it was so bad, we actually let the program lapse 4 different times by inaction, shutting down thousands upon thousands of real estate closings that we needed to build up our economy, shutting those down every time. So we needed that reauthorization. And we needed and still need reform of the program. We need to build up the program to make it fiscally sustainable, to make sure that over time we get revenues, premiums coming in that cover the full costs of the program. And there's no debate about that. And that's why we passed that bill. What was not foreseen, Mr. President, was that in some significant number of cases, those reforms, once they were put into effect, would actually lead to completely unaffordable rate increases, a completely unsustainable path forward that wouldn't even get us toward the goal of building up the fund and building up the program to make it fiscally sustainable. No expert predicted that beforehand. No one from FEMA said you will have some rates that are completely unaffordable. No outside insurance experts said that. But once the details of the reauthorization were begun to be put in place, that became very apparent. Now, Mr. President, we don't know exactly how many cases we would have like this, but we know they're not just isolated cases. We know they're not just in coastal communities. They're in every state to some extent or another around the country. And over time, members of both parties from every state have begun to understand that, which brings us together, hopefully, in a constructive way on the floor today. Certainly, that situation is dire and the threat is very real in Louisiana. Months ago, for instance, I visited a neighborhood in St. Charles Parish, part of southeast Louisiana, right on the Mississippi River. I visited a very nice, solid, middle-class neighborhood. And I met with many, many homeowners there, and they presented me with a box this big at least, full of keys, house keys. And they were these folks' actual house keys. And they were saying, if this isn't fixed, if this isn't done right in time, we're going to have to turn these keys in to the bank, to the government, to whomever, because we would face not just premium increases. We had all accepted premium increases as part of the reforms, as part of the reauthorization, but completely unaffordable, unsustainable increases, literally going to $12,000 or $18,000 or $27,000 a year, not on a millionaire's home, on a modest middle-class home. That just doesn't work. And these folks were saying very sincerely, very directly, here are my home keys, because that's where this is headed. Now, that's not right on so many different levels. First and foremost, it's not right for those Americans who have lived by the rules every step of the way, who built to the right elevation when they built their home, who got the flood insurance required by law and required by prudence, who paid all of their premiums, who went through mitigation programs, if they could, to raise their homes in many cases. But these are folks that are not living right on the coast, that are not choosing highly dangerous areas, who do not have second homes, beach homes. We're not talking about that at all. We're talking about a solid middle-class neighborhood way off the Gulf Coast, way off the Gulf Coast. People who followed the rules every step of the way, who still faced the prospect of those completely unaffordable increases. That's not right, and it's not fair. On a second level, that reality threatens whole communities and threatens our economy. Because if that were allowed to happen in any significant number of cases, it would be an economic spiral downwards. Banks would be burdened with foreclosures. Local businesses would be hurt significantly. Whole communities would be in an economic spiral downward. And again, we're not just talking about second homes on a beach. We're not talking about that at all in Louisiana. And by the way, this bill does not give any relief regarding second homes, for instance. We're talking about a lot of communities and a real and unsustainable hit to our economy. And on a third and final level, that reality would ensure we don't even get to the goal of these reforms, which is to make the system whole and fiscally sustainable. Because to do that, we need more folks in the National Flood Insurance Program, not folks leaving, turning in their keys. That will kill any effort to make the program solid fiscally and sustainable fiscally. So on every level, we cannot allow this to happen. The Menendez-Isaacson bill, with the help of many other members, including myself, was put together to get us to the right place. And it takes the important first step to make sure we get it right. FEMA does the mapping right, which they're not doing right in some cases now. FEMA does the affordability study mandated in the original Biggert-Waters bill, but which FEMA has not even begun yet. We do all those things to get this right and avoid completely unaffordable rate increases. And I urge my colleagues on a bipartisan basis to support this good bill. We also need your support in defeating the Toomey Amendment and waiving the budget point of order. And let me speak about those briefly. Pat Toomey's amendment is very well intended, but it falls short, in my opinion. It limits any delay in rate increases to 2 years, and some rate increases continue for those 2 years. And most importantly, it doesn't mandate and ensure that FEMA ever gets through this affordability study, ever makes recommendations to Congress for the ultimate fix, doesn't give us any time to react and legislate in that area, and it doesn't ensure in any way that FEMA gets its mapping right based on true sound science and engineering methodologies. So that's just kicking the can down the road and not ensuring in any meaningful way that we're going to get it right. That simply isn't good enough. We need to tie in any delay to figuring out the ultimate fix by having FEMA complete its affordability study, by making FEMA make recommendations to us, by giving us 6 months to act on those recommendations, by mandating that FEMA do its mapping correctly and not have rate increases before it rushes forward with incorrect mapping, which is going on right now in some cases. That's what the underlying bill does. That's what the Toomey Amendment does not do, as well intended as it is. Secondly, there will be a budget point of order vote, and we do need 60 votes to waive that budget point of order. And I will vote yes to waive it as a strong fiscal conservative, because this is necessary to get this national flood insurance system right and to make it fiscally sustainable. In fact, over the 10-year budget window that we normally use in scoring, this bill has no score over those 10 years. It just has some scores in some intermediate periods of time, which gives rise to the budget point of order. So I urge my colleagues to vote to waive that point of order, knowing that there is no score over 10 years. Also knowing that, quite frankly, the fiscal assumptions about the current law are enormously flawed. The notion that we're going to make the National Flood Insurance Program more stable and more fiscally sustainable by having a bunch of premiums go up to $27,000 a year on a modest middle-class home is crazy. That's not going to get us to a better place. That's going to get us to a worse place. That's going to shrink the program. That's going to have people leaving the program paying no premiums, not paying higher premiums. Yes, reasonable premium increases have to be part of the solution, but completely unaffordable premium increases aren't part of the solution because people can't afford to pay them. So they'll pay zero instead of something substantial. They'll leave the program instead of putting more homeowners and properties in the program, which is essential to get to a strong and stable fiscal situation. So again, on a bipartisan basis, I urge my colleagues to support this bill. It's a very important step to stabilize and fix the situation and to defeat the Toomey Amendment and waive the budget point of order, which is absolutely necessary in this process to support a good bill. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor.